If you're not interested in hearing an interesting conversation, just stop listening right now. But for the rest of you, turn up the volume on your computer, smartphone, or mobile device and prepare to listen, laugh, and learn. You don't have to wake up early anymore. It doesn't matter where you are or when you are, because you are listening to the podcast devoted to in-depth conversation of the issues of the day, passionate debates that you don't hear anywhere else, and stuff that we just don't have time to get to on the radio. You're listening to Morano Whenever. Please welcome Frank Morano.
Well, they said it wouldn't last, but here we are. Sure enough, we have made it to the second action-packed edition of the Morano Whenever Podcast. And what a time to be podcasting, because this is one of the most exciting times, if you're a fan of public policy, of government, of politics, to be commenting on any of those things. Because just this week, the president took a bold step forward in coming out in favor of this criminal justice reform bill. Now, we're going to get into the details of exactly what it is, but the thing that's interesting is that this is the only thing, really, in the last 10 years in Washington that is actually bipartisan. Why are Republicans for it? Why are Democrats for it? Well, believe it or not, that was actually one of the subjects that we dealt with on our criminal justice reform panel at Nyack College this week. It was a great panel, a lot of great, interesting discussion. There was actually 3 panels, but I moderated one. And it was a really interesting discussion. Elias Husamadeen, the president of the Correction Officers Benevolent Association, he was there. Richard Stratton, who you may remember from episode 1 of the Morano Whenever podcast, drug trafficker turned journalist and author, he was there. Aaron Comey, who was arrested for hijacking an airplane when he was 17. He was there. And distinguished criminal defense attorney Mathew Mari, he was there. The only problem is you weren't. Nobody showed up to this. And you missed out on a really fascinating discussion. So I don't want to make you sit through this, but you have to. You didn't show up, and you missed out on a lot of great conversation. That's what you're going to hear right now. Here's my discussion with Richard Stratton, Aaron Comey, Mathew Mari, and Elias Husamadeen. Let me introduce you. My name's Frank Morano, those of you that have walked in a little bit late. I'm with AM 970. Those of you that have stuck around for the previous 2 panels, this is our final discussion, and in some ways we're going to end it sort of where we began and discuss some of the broader problems with our criminal justice system. And my hope is, over the next 45 minutes or so, that this will actually be a little bit more instructive and educational in terms of getting public policy solutions to some of the problems that we're facing in the criminal justice system today. Now, Elias, you've seen, he is the president of the Correction Officers Benevolent Association. Mathew Mari is a distinguished criminal defense attorney who's been practicing for a number of years, heard a not guilty verdict quite a bit lately, and even before that, he heard even the better thing that you can hear than not guilty, which is when he had a client that was facing the death penalty. He heard that client was not getting the death penalty. Only verdict that's better to hear than not guilty. At three, there you go. Aaron Comey is a libertarian activist, but when he was 17 years old, he was arrested for hijacking an airplane, and he must have had an attorney like Mathew Mari, because he heard the phrase, not guilty, but he then heard the words, you never want to hear after that, by reason of insanity. So we're going to find out how sane or insane he is momentarily, and what we can do about mental health. And the gentleman closest to me has almost as much time in prisons and in jails as Elias did. In his case, it was a decade in federal prison for importing marijuana and hashish. Richard Stratton is now a very successful author, journalist, filmmaker. He's written several books. His most recent book is Kingpin, Prisoner of the War on Drugs. And he just had a very successful documentary series on A&E called Gotti, Godfather, and Son. So, gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for being here.
Thank you for having us, Frank.
So, right now, there's a big ceremony going on at the White House. President Bush, Jared Kushner, some senators praising the likely passage and doing a little cheerleading for a bipartisan criminal justice reform measure. Now, we're going to get into that in just a minute. But
President Bush?
President Trump. Did I say President Bush?
Bush.
It's been a long day. Long day. Sorry. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. But I want to ask each of you more broadly, whether it's at the federal level, whether it's at the state level, or whether it's at the municipal level. We recognize that in a free society, there's always going to be crime. We're going to have to do something about people that commit those crimes, right? So everybody here, and we'll begin with you, Richard, and we'll go straight down the line. What are the biggest problems in the criminal justice system today, and how do we fix them?
Number one, biggest problem is the war on drugs. The war on drugs is a big mistake from the very beginning. Crime and punishment are something that we need to pay close attention to, but the drug issue and drug use and drug addiction is a medical health issue and not one that can be fixed by the criminal justice system. It's only made everything about the criminal justice system worse, beginning with overcrowding in prisons, beginning with corruption with the police officers, beginning in every step of the way. It is the most significant problem facing the criminal justice system is the wrong-headed, erroneous, bogus war on drugs.
All right, Aaron?
No, sorry.
Yeah, the war on drugs is a horrible problem. I think there's so many problems, and it stems down to people using laws to legislate something they don't like, as opposed to something that is actually using force against somebody or fraud against somebody or crimes with actual victims. The war on drugs is horrible, but I think one of the aspects in changing the criminal justice system is giving people who are most directly affected by it an opportunity to do something. And I think voting rights need to be restored to prisoners in 48 states, because 2 states already allow prisoners to vote.
Well, I think that it's difficult enough through my 42 years of being a lawyer for the judges, the prosecutors, and the criminal defense lawyers to try to make some sense out of the criminal justice system. And the most important problem that's facing us today is politics at the courthouse, media in the courthouse. Everything is distorted. Nothing is done for the sake of doing things for the right way. Everything is turned into a political battle. Everything is turned into a media issue, and we've got to take it away from them. We've got to say that when it comes to the criminal justice system, when it comes to the prison system, that we've got to let the professionals try to do it, at least give us a chance to try to do it without this political interference. And I think that mental illness, especially on the local and state level, and especially with regard to these mass shootings, is something that needs to be addressed, and everyone has to keep an open mind. And I mean criminal defense lawyers like myself have to consider there must be different ways of dealing with this, perhaps monitoring social media, perhaps allowing the police to confront people and to stop people who have mental illness from applying for guns. I happen to be someone who grew up as a Democrat. I don't want to call myself a liberal, but, a criminal defense lawyer I am. I think I've come to realize the importance in this country of some people for the Second Amendment and for legitimate people to have guns for legitimate purposes, but we've got to stop the mentally ill from having weapons, and we've got to start monitoring people, and that's really tough for me to say as a criminal defense lawyer.
Well, let me bring in a gentleman who represents a number of people that have been forced to become experts in the treatment of mental illness, unfortunately, because they're supposed to be minding a jail. Elias, the interesting thing about correction officers is no matter the movie, right? Shawshank Redemption, right? You name it. The Green Mile. You name it, the CO is always the bad guy, right? You represent the bad guys, which is ironic being up here with a couple of people who are former criminals. So tell me, one, what do you think of what Matt said about mental illness? How does that play into your members? And what about my question more broadly about how do we fix the criminal justice system? We all want to be safe.
I'm still learning and trying to be politically correct when I speak. I get real nervous every time I hear the government, be it federal, city, state, local, talk about criminal justice reform. It just, because what I've found in the last 4 or 5 years, 2 years especially of being the president, most of the people that I sit down with have no idea of what they're talking about when they start talking about criminal justice reform. I mean, I damn near don't even know what it means anymore, other than, get out of jail free, or, he did it because he was mentally ill or he was homeless. Look, with corrections, we're the last stop on the train when it comes to criminal justice. But for whatever reason, everybody wants to focus on the last stop and not the first stop. Nobody wants to focus on the judges, the lawyers, the district attorneys, the police. Nobody wants to focus on the person that this person met 5 times before they got to me. So when we start talking about criminal justice reform, we're always only talking about jail. And like you said, and I'll close with this, I have an issue, and I talk to you about it, because when it comes to the American DNA in correction officers, depending on your age, we're talking about the Shawshank Redemption. We're talking about James Cagney. I mean, hell, my show Scandal, Cyrus got arrested, and when he went to jail, the CEO set him up to get his butt kicked. So, correction officers don't usually get that law and order, blue bloods type of light.
Let me bring in Richard here. Richard, in your book, Kingpin, you told a story of being housed in a federal prison, and you and your fellow inmates were so antagonistic towards one of the correction officers that you actually, not you personally, but you, the inmates, actually drove this officer to kill himself. How does the relationship between COs, people in prison, and people in jail, how does it improve?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, education is always an issue, but I think that, look, correction officers, cops, like everybody else, there's good and there's bad. I mean, in the 8 years I was in prison, I met some really good, stand-up, respectable, honest correction officers who I could consider to be really doing their job and doing it right. But I also met and came in contact with corrections officers who were involved in criminal activity themselves, who were on the take, who were bringing in drugs. I mean, these things exist, and I will say that in my years since I got out of prison, I've acted as an expert witness in a number of cases where there were homicides in prison. And homicides in prison, in my experience, 98% of the time, there is correctional officers' complicity. I think the recent most example of Whitey Bulger, who was just murdered in prison, that could not happen without correction officers being involved. A lot of the gang warfare that takes place in prisons is instigated by the corrections officers. We've seen cases where corrections officers had their own gangs, and they were dealing with gang activity themselves. So you've got good and bad on both sides. You've got good and bad corrections officers, you've got good and bad cops. It's just the nature of human beings.
Well, we shouldn't forget doctors, lawyers, politicians, nurses, school bus drivers. We shouldn't forget about the good and bad.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about criminal justice
right?
here.
Right, but the difference between the school bus driver and the corrections officer is the level of control that a correction officer has over somebody else's life, and so that's why you have such a focus on the harm that can be done, because you are dealing with people who are stripped of so many rights and whose lives are literally in these people's hands. So if you have a correction officer who is corrupt, who is hateful, who is vindictive or sadistic, it will have such a demonstrably more dangerous effect on somebody's life, in sometimes ending people's lives inside these prisons, because you've got somebody who has all the power and you're dealing with somebody who has none.
I'm usually on panels with people who haven't been in jail 10, 15 years, and they're usually talking about something that happened 30 years ago. New York City jail system, Rikers Island, we have 12,000 cameras. There is nowhere other than the bathroom that there isn't a camera. And listening to him saying that murder can't happen in jail without a correction officer. Well, I am a correction officer, and since I've been a correction officer, there have been inmates murdered, and I had nothing to do with it and didn't know anything about it. The fact of the matter is today, a housing area in New York City Rikers Island Jail consists of 50 inmates and 1 correction officer, 100 inmates and 2 correction officers. Currently, those 50 inmates are all gang members. Now, of course, they expect me as the correction officer to go in here and do my job and make sure that everybody is safe when they took me and threw me in the middle of nothing but criminals who've gotten together themselves and decided that they're going to continue their criminal behavior while they're in jail, just like they did
And I've heard you
when they were in
say,
the
though,
street.
Elias, the vast amount of people...
There's a point.
Sorry, I'll let you comment next, Aaron. I've heard you say, Elias, before, just to be clear, that the vast amount of people, detainees, inmates, however you want to refer to them, they're what you would refer to as good inmates, well-behaved, not a problem.
The fact of the matter is more than 97% of the inmates in our custody don't give us problems. They don't cut each other. They don't stab officers. They don't assault officers. They don't assault each other. There's this 3% that 3% is usually who they're talking about when they're talking about criminal justice reform. There's this percentage of inmates who've decided that they're going to live their life in jail the same way they lived it when they were in the street. The problem is nobody wants to actually address them. We're hearing more about doing something for the 3% than we are in doing something for the 97%. Example, we talk about closing Rikers, $30 billion to build 4 new jails.
That's
but
for the 97%.
There is no $30 billion to create mental health facility, and they tell us that 41% of our inmates suffer from some form of mental illness, but they're not putting any money, and that's not even a part of the criminal justice reform movement.
Aaron, speaking of mental health, can you share with folks your own story and tell me how you think the system, whatever the system means, federal, local, whatever, can do a better job addressing mental health when it comes to the criminal justice system?
Okay, yeah. So first of all, I don't think mental illness should be criminalized, and I don't think people should automatically paint the picture of mentally ill people as being dangerous. There are some people who are mentally ill who are dangerous, and at one point, my mental illness made me a danger to other people. So yeah, I was younger. I became delusional. I thought the government was trying to kill me, and I said, I believed that there was this government organization that was going to create mass destruction on other people, and so I said, I have to go get to this government organization and stop them. It led me to get board a plane, attempt to hijack the plane, and fortunately, I was able to be, the negotiator was able to talk me down, and without me hurting anyone. So I'm really fortunate for that. Once I got to the system, it took me a few years before I was able to regain my sanity. So about 3 years afterwards, I regained my sanity, and I was recommended for release. But that's when things went horribly south, because I do agree with you that judges have to be part of the discussion in criminal justice reform, because I was dealing with a judge who just decided to ignore the rules. And I was dealing with individuals in the system who decided that, we have the power, so we're just going to continue to leave you in there. So I think my story should shed some serious light on the fact that we need to be very cautious about how people are being labeled mentally ill, and to make sure that they're actually receiving treatment and not just being warehoused. Because there were, throughout my entire time I had to see a lot of people who were not, receiving adequate treatment, and who were just being kept there because they didn't have the resources to get out.
Mathew Mari, you get people out of jail for a living, and out of prison for a living. When we began, I mentioned that America leads the world in the percentage of people incarcerated. Is that because Americans are more evil than anywhere else on earth?
No, it's because of politics. It's because of straight-laced politics. And what was said a few moments ago about correction officers getting the blame for what's going on in the prisons, that's insane. That is the last stop. It's not the place where we should begin to look to solve the problem. We have to look at the beginnings of everything, the entire criminal justice system from A to Z. The correctional facilities are Z. When I look at Rikers Island, first of all, I've been a lawyer for 42 years. I don't like going to Rikers Island. It's a tough trip for a lawyer. But let me say this. The whole place is run down. The whole place needs to be refurbished. The whole system needs to be reorganized. But that doesn't mean that you give up this perfect place for incarceration and try to just redo everything for the sake of politics. It's insanity. And to try to spend that kind of money and not direct that money toward the right place. We need more correction officers at the end game here, but we need to start directing our attention from the very beginning to mental illness. This is also one of the major causes of homelessness. We've got people on the street, and the politicians, they answer that by saying, oh, well, they have a right to live on the street. Oh, we're going to send them to a nice hotel. Oh, we're going to send them to a nice apartment and pay 3 times the cost of what a normal person would pay. We've got to understand that society has to pay the bill to get the mentally ill off the street before they commit crimes, not when they get into the criminal justice.
The vast majority of mentally ill people are not dangerous. So,
they need help, though.
Right, but
even in jail, that's true.
Right, and that's the point. That there's a very dangerous road you're going down if you're saying we need to be locking up mentally ill people for the good of society.
Not locking them up, identifying them and helping them. You don't leave them on the street. You don't send them to some fancy hotel, and you don't lock them up and put them in a prison with regular criminals. They need to be in a special place. They need to be treated. They need to be rehabilitated. This is a serious problem.
The danger is when you say, okay, we'll put them in a special place. You can call it, we're gonna make this special place for mentally ill people, and it's going to be a prison.
No, it'll be a hospital.
Right. Just like I spent 15 years in a hospital. I was in a prison, but they call it a hospital. So this is just a perfect game of semantics that politics will play, because they will call it one thing and it will actually be the other thing.
I want to bring Richard in here, and then I want to follow up on the point several of you were making when it comes to politics. Richard, Bernie Kerik was here earlier. He went from being very successful in both the public sector and the private sector to being a federal inmate. Talks about how he was earning close to about $1 million a year. And when he went to prison, not only was the taxpayer not the beneficiary of getting to get his taxable income, but now they had to pay to incarcerate him. When he was in prison, he met a lot of people that were never a danger to anybody, but were in prison for maybe being a commercial fisherman and catching too many fish, maybe being a white-collar criminal. Those are all people whose families are now deprived of a bread earner's income, and we, the taxpayers, are deprived of their tax money, and now have to pay $100,000 or so to house them in prison. Tell me, who belongs in prison? How do we decide that? And what do we do with the folks that are in prison that don't belong there?
Violent criminal offenders belong in prison. People who steal from other people, people who beat other people who kill other people, violent criminal offenders belong in prison. Sex offenders belong in prison. These people need to be locked up. What horrifies me is when I hear about people, and I know people. I was sentenced in '84. If I had been sentenced in '86, I would have had a life sentence with no possibility of parole, and all I did was smuggle pot, which is legal now. And there are still many, many people in prisons all across this country for marijuana offenses. How does that make sense when you're paying $30,000 a year and up to house these people for something that's virtually legal now? Keep the really serious 10% maybe of people who were locked up in this country who are violent criminals who need to be locked up. And having been there with them, I know who they are, and they're there, and they need to be there. Because once they get out on the street, they're predators. They're going to start doing the same thing. Again, also.
So if what you said is true, is the solution to change the law? Is it for prosecutors not to pursue criminal sentences for these people? Is it for judges not to put someone that's nonviolent in prison, or is it some combination of all those things?
Well, it's some combination of all those things. But again, it goes back to the war on drugs. The war on drugs is the engine behind
take somebody like Bernie
Madoff.
Madoff. Bernie Madoff's never going to be violent ever. He wasn't violent ever in his entire life. Now he's never going to be out of prison again. A lot of people say, you know what? You got to sentence a guy like Bernie Madoff to the maximum possible penalty to send a message to the next guy. What do all of you say to that?
But I said people who steal money, people who are thieves, people who are crooks, people who do stuff like that that's really bad and hurts other people.
So nonviolent drug offenders should be out.
Nonviolent drug offenders. The war on drugs, again, I'll say it again, 60 to 70% of the people who are locked up in this country are there for nonviolent drug
But
offenders.
a nonviolent thief should be in.
But
A nonviolent thief should definitely do some time, or first pay back what he stole if they possibly can, and then do some time.
Let me just ask a question. Okay, I'm from Harlem, all right? I lived in Harlem at a time when it was horrible, and it had a lot to do with drugs. It had a lot to do with people selling drugs. It had a lot to do with people using drugs. As a result of drugs, people were being murdered and robbed and killed.
What's the biggest drug problem in this country right now?
Wait.
Come on.
We cannot act like that there is no crime or there's nothing that, drugs are like victimless crimes. It's not a victimless crime.
Of course,
what do
drugs
we do
are a
about
problem.
that?
Look, what's the biggest drug problem in this country today? Opioids. Who's selling them? Doctors. Who's making them? Big corporations. Are those people going to prison? No. 60 people a day dying from the use of opioids?
Send them to jail.
Why is
Send
there so
them
much
to jail? Yeah, right.
Why is there so much violence with drugs? Because it's illegal. Anytime prohibition doesn't work. When alcohol was illegal, the organized crime was created. You make drugs illegal, you created crime. That's what they did. The war on drugs has created more victims than drugs itself, and it has done nothing to curb the use of drugs. So to try to defend the war on drugs,
I'm not trying to defend it, but I know as a young kid with a mother, listen, all I'm saying to you is I was a victim of drugs because of the people around me who used it, sold it, and dealt with it. So I don't know how you say to me that drugs don't affect my life.
So are you saying
my life?
What about
who
people
I
who are
am
victims
and what
of?
I become?
In your terms, in the way you're describing a victim, you can now say people are victims of alcohol. You can now say people are victims of tobacco.
I'm not going to jump around with you. You guys are talking about drugs.
Right.
So I'm not going to play the what about alcohol, what about this,
No,
what
that's
about
exactly.
pills?
How
What
many
I'm
lives,
saying to
how
you
many
is
people,
when
how
I
many
came up
lives,
in
how many
Harlem,
families are destroyed by
heroin
alcohol?
and
So
cocaine
to
was
try
a
to-
problem.
I want to ask one question for Elias. Can we agree that maybe these mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenders, maybe that is something that we can all look
We
at?
could
Which is the
absolutely
bill
agree.
that the president is touting
We could
today.
absolutely agree.
That's one of the things that I've been talking about for years now. Mandatory minimum sentences are part of the political process, not even to put a Band-Aid on the problem, but to make politicians look good. And these mandatory minimum sentences and the abolition of parole, and to say that people have to do 85% of every sentence, and pretty soon we're going to throw away the key for every goddamn crime, because no matter what, every year the politicians want to get tough. Oh, we're tough on crime. We're tough on crime. They're tough on nothing. All they want to do is to constantly be reelected. And here's the problem that we've got to face. We've got a criminal justice system that's totally out of control. It's totally out of control. And mandatory minimum sentences, I could say as a criminal defense lawyer, presupposes that prosecutors and judges are cream puffs, that they're going to go along with anything that I wanted to have done. It's not the truth. Prosecutors are tough. Judges are tough. And let me say to you, Frank, I consider every judge I come in front of to be on the prosecutor's side. So when you say you need mandatory minimum sentences, you're saying that the judges are a bunch of idiots and that the prosecutors are a bunch of cream puffs.
Look,
it's not true.
Part of the
when we come
reason-
to a plea deal, it's a result of a lot of negotiation, a lot of factors coming in, and believe me, it's difficult. It's difficult to get things done.
Let me ask about politics, since everybody here alluded to it, and I'll begin with you, Matt, and then ask everyone else to weigh in. We see a very costly, very lengthy investigation going on right now involving President Trump, Robert Mueller's investigation into President Trump. A lot of the president's critics, they are cheering this on. They are all for indicting Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Jerome Corsi, goes down the line. On the other side of the aisle, Republicans were cheering like crazy when Bob Menendez went on trial in New Jersey, and when John Edwards went on trial in North Carolina, and when Shelley Silver went on trial here in Manhattan. So it seems like that, now, none of those people that I just mentioned are violent. None of them have ever been violent. It seems like we've seen, much more so than any time prior to 10 years ago, a criminalization of political differences. Do you think that politicians and people that step in the political arena, including Elias's predecessor, by the way, who, although a union leader, was very much a political heavyweight, do you think politicians are being targeted? And is it still possible for a politician to get a fair trial?
Frank, you know me. As a criminal defense lawyer, you also know I'm no left-wing limousine liberal.
Well,
I'm a kind of a conservative guy, and I'm a supporter of President Trump.
For the next 20
but let me
minutes,
say this.
Let's forget about
this is all
labels,
crazy.
right?
A lot of stuff is going on. You know, when politics takes over the courthouse, it's just a little too much. And I'm not saying that certain politicians, whether it be Bob Menendez or whether it's Shelley Silver or whether it's Dean Skelos, the Republican, or whatever, I'm not saying they don't need to be checked. But it all becomes a professional prostitution of the criminal justice system. And we got to kind of focus on what real crime is. And, you know, we've got to put people in jail, unfortunately. But there's a lot of people in jail who should be paroled early. There are a lot of people in jail who could be on probation. There are a lot of people in jail who could be on house arrest. What we call house arrest means you have a bracelet on, that they know everywhere you're going to go, that you're allowed to go to work, that you have to go home, that you have to get permission to go here, there, that you have a list of former associates that you can't talk to, you can't be involved with felons. We've got to find alternatives to this ever bludgeoning prison population, and especially, we've got to get the old men out of prison. We've got to get the old men who are in these prison hospitals who've done 20 and 30 years, and then they're 60, 70 years old, 80 years old, some 90 years old. Get them out of the prison system.
Let me give everybody else an opportunity to comment on this subject, have we made politics criminal? And then if people have questions or comments in a respectful, educational manner, we'll welcome the opportunity to hear from them. Aaron.
Well, politics is definitely...
And I also want to mention Aaron last year ran for mayor as the Libertarian Party nominee.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, politics is definitely something to take in consideration, but I want to point to something else in terms of, we're bringing this all full circle in terms of the A point where this starts, because you had mentioned you shouldn't just be focusing on corrections. So the A point is where it starts, is with the politicians who are making all of these things illegal. And they're not making it illegal necessarily for the benefit of us. They're making it illegal oftentimes to cater to special interest groups. So now...
Well, theft of honest services, that's not really something that catered to special interest groups.
Well,
right?
no, the war on drugs. The pharmaceutical companies don't want marijuana
talk to me
legalized.
about all these endless investigations that we see politicians of both stripes. You know, at the Republican convention, I saw all the people in the RNC chanting, lock her up. Yeah. I see people, you know, just rooting for Donald Trump to get indicted. So talk to me about the criminalization of politics.
Well, there's a problem when people are rooting for laws and procedures to be violated because there's a political opponent.
Right.
And that's very dangerous. And I see it right now. People are rooting for dismissal of due process because it's a political opponent that they're dealing with. But I don't think that that's actually what's happening. I think people are rooting for it, and I think we need to make sure it doesn't happen. But I don't think that's actually what's happening. I think what you're dealing with is just levels of corruption that are just that government is so rife with that so many people could be indicted, but now political enemies are actually
right.
getting
Well,
indicted.
Harvey Silverglade wrote the book, 3 Felonies a Day. Richard, something that you have in common with a lot of other people, right, is there used to be a time when we think of crime and how it's prosecuted where somebody robs a bank or somebody's murdered. The mission then becomes about, let's find out who robbed the bank or who murdered them. Now, you, because you had a lot of celebrity friends at the time and you were a high-profile writer before you were arrested, you very clearly, to me anyway, speaking for myself, were targeted by federal law enforcement agents and prosecutors. A lot of people said that after the second, third, fourth trial of John Gotti Jr., maybe he was targeted, right? A lot of people say that Donald Trump, had Paul Manafort not been his campaign manager, he never would have been arrested, right? Do prosecutors target people rather than crimes, and how do we change that?
Well, I definitely think they do. I mean, when there's a high-profile person out there, defendant out there, or someone, of course, they're going to get publicity for it. They're going to get kudos if they lock that guy up. I mean, in my case, after I got arrested, they said to me basically, look, you give up this guy, and this guy, and you walk out of here tomorrow. I mean, it was just, flipping people and getting people to rat on other people is a big part of the whole process. And if it's somebody with a big name that they can lock up and get publicity for it, of course they're going to do it. But I just want to go back to one thing that we talked about earlier. The biggest cause of crime in this country is lack of education. In these neighborhoods that this gentleman talked about in Harlem and some of these other depressed inner cities, it's education that leads these kids ultimately, because lack of education. A lot of them can't read or write properly. They can't get a good job. They can't create a decent life for themselves. They end up on the street. I mean, when I was in prison, I was blown away by how intelligent some of these guys were, and they'd never even been beyond 6th grade. But because they just came from neighborhoods where there was no opportunity to stay in school and get a good education, they ended up on the street, and they got involved with gangs, and they ended up in prison. So it's really, there's something about, instead of just say no, N-O, we should be saying just say no, K-N-O-W. Spend all that money you spend on this war on drugs in improving the education systems in our inner cities and helping people in these neighborhoods to get out of that ghetto environment and get good jobs. That would be, I think, a much better way of spending
Elias,
their money.
The drug issue notwithstanding, because that's obviously a broader conversation, it seems like you are all saying the same thing, but it seems like I've heard that for 3 decades, that education is the problem. If everybody seems to know that and says it, why have policymakers never done anything about it?
Listen, I think that without sounding corny, a crime is a crime, regardless of where it's committed or who it's committed by. And I think that America has gotten so far away from the things that were important and are important. Just to go back to what I said earlier. So you have a kid who's arrested for supposedly stealing a book bag or a backpack, right? So his first encounter with the law is the cops, right? They take him to the precinct, fingerprint. Probably don't call his mom's or his father. Decide to take him to central booking. Take him to central booking, he has to deal with the ADA. Then he has to deal with the district attorney, and then he has to be provided a legal aid attorney. Goes before a judge. All of this stuff happens. He ends up in jail. And the only thing we want to focus on is jail. Nothing that happened prior to. And I think that's a part of the problem. I think that when we start talking about criminal justice reform, I mean, we got to be real.
So step
be
one,
serious.
step one in changing that is what? Let's say we made you dictator of the criminal justice system for a day. You could do anything. What would it be? What's step one?
Step one is I would take away the excuses of poverty, because I come from a poor family, and I don't come from a family of people who are a bunch of criminals. They didn't commit crimes because they were poor. And I mean,
country was founded by criminals.
I mean, we were poor. So at
George
the end of the
Washington was a
day,
criminal to the
one of the
British.
things that I would take away is I would absolutely produce job training. I would absolutely produce mental health facilities. I would absolutely put in these communities the things that we know people need. Let me just say this, right? Right now, if you're an inmate and you're on Rikers Island, you can get training to be a sheetrock. You can do sheetrocking. You can get training. They'll help you get your full certificate. Right now, they will assist you and help you in getting a driver's license. They will help you when you come out get a job. But none of this stuff is offered to you before you go. So if we really want to talk about criminal justice reform, that's how we need to start.
Let me give folks an opportunity to comment. If anybody has a question, questions are preferred rather than comments or argument. This way we could get to some really hopeful solutions. Mr. Browder.
So I just wanted to say, once again, I wanted to reestablish the reason why we did punishment, or how we do the punishment in America, is behind the principles of punishment, which is incapacitation, which we have. We have a way to hold people incarcerated. Retribution, which is punishment. We hold them in captivity while they are, that's punishment enough. Deterrent. We hold people from society that may help us or hurt us, so we hold them in.
So just to bring to a close your question or your point.
Rehabilitation is the only thing that we don't do. Hold mottos of care, custody, and control, or professionalism, courtesy,
Great.
respect.
That's a great point. I'll let you comment first, Aaron, and then Richard, both of you who have had the unfortunate distinction of being held against your will by federal authorities. How do we rehabilitate people? Let's say I'm a wayward youth. Let's say I make a bad decision. We've all made mistakes. When I get sent to prison, what is the best way for me to be rehabilitated and reintegrated back to society? You already mentioned voting. Anything beyond that?
Yeah. Job training, education. Look, the recidivism rate goes down by a huge percentage with the prisoners who get secondary education and even college education in prison. It goes way down. But if you got to lock a guy up, you put him in a brutal prison where there's nothing but gangs going on, and then he gets out on the street, it's going to be a worse threat to society than he was before he went in. I mean, the prisons make these people worse.
And when you take a look at some of the legislation, like the VCCLEA, which stopping people in prisons from being able to get higher education, that's a problem. When you start legislating to take away people's ability to improve themselves, that's a serious problem. That needs to be done away. And if people aren't, politicians aren't talking about undoing that, they're not serious about reform. But you need to have opportunities for people to be educated, and you need to have corrections officers have to actually themselves be correct. If you have corruption within the correctional system, that is going to foster that's going to inhibit people from being able to be rehabilitated, because if the system is corrupt, they can't possibly correct people.
Mathew Mari, to Mr. Browder's point, to Mr. Stratton's point, and Mr. Comey, what do we do with people?
I remember a few years ago, a thing was passed called the Second Chance Act, and I remember reading about it, and then I don't remember anything ever happening with it. And we've got the largest prison population in the world, and when these people get out of prison, you've got to do something with them. Society has an interest in doing something, and I just want to give you an idea that may sound silly, but like AARP, how all the senior citizens are organized, where you get insurance because you're part of a group, where you get this and you get that, and you're organized. I think that when people come out of prison, the government should help them. There should be organizations which organize them to get jobs, which organize them to get the right medical coverage, things like that, and maybe even to organize as a group to buy insurance together, to do things together, to act together, to help each other. And I know through that Second Chance Act, there was supposed to be opportunities where businesses who hire ex-inmates are going to get advantages, tax advantages. What happened to all that?
Well,
Nothing.
Elias, I know primarily your members deal with folks in jails rather than in prison, but you, in many respects, have more vested interest than anybody in ending this revolving door of prison, going back out on the street, going back to jail, then to prison. What do you make of the suggestions you've heard today? And what would you do if you were trying to come up with a strategy to rehabilitate people that make their way through the prison system?
Like I said, I mean, you have to begin to help them before they begin a life of crime or a life committing crimes. The reality is that, like you said, we run a jail system. The one thing that I have to say, I have 11,000 correctional officers in New York City, and 57% of my members are women. And the reality is, you have no idea how every day there are inmates waiting for my people to come to work, because that's their only connection to the outside, because they receive encouragement from a lot of my members. I usually don't like these panels because I have to sit here and hear the stories of the bad guy, when at the end of the day, my members, like I said, they run athletic programs in the community. They take care. We're about to give away 500 coats in the Bronx. This is something that we, correction officers, we do out of our own pocket, has nothing to do. But to answer your question more directly, we have to deal with them before they go to jail. We can't wait until they go to jail to decide that we want to spend money and help them, because come on, like, where are we going with this?
Well, so when we hear about things like ban the box that prohibits employers from asking, have you ever been arrested? A positive first step in terms of allowing these people to reintegrate back into society? What do you think?
I don't know. You probably got to ask people that's much more smarter than me as far as that, because what did the person, what would they injure? I don't know how to answer that.
Okay, but I want to address, his point about, doing something before people get in. I definitely agree we do, and it's not necessarily that there's a lack of education, it's that there's miseducation. The public educational system isn't being designed for people to truly thrive. It's only being made for people to basically get by. That's why you have people going from kindergarten to 12th grade, and the only job they can get is at McDonald's or Dwayne Reed. If we're going to be serious about this, we need to have an educational system that's truly working to help people thrive and succeed in life.
All right. Let me ask all of you, we're not going to let, before we leave here, we're not going to let Mathew Mari get out of here without being a villain, because so far we've heard what the criminals are doing wrong. We've heard what the judges are doing wrong. We've heard what the prosecutors are doing wrong. We've heard what the COs are doing wrong. But every criminal I've known, and I've known many, has a horror story about a defense attorney, okay? You hear so many cases of plea agreements that people who believe they could beat a case at trial are forced into because they can't afford to pay their defense attorney. You hear case after case of people who believe that they were inadequately served by their defense attorney, whether it was a court-appointed one or one that they hired. Richard, your first trial, you had a high-priced defense attorney, you got convicted, you said, if I ever go to trial again, I'm representing myself. You did just that. Tell me, how can we reform the role of lawyers in our society, state level, federal level? Do the defense attorneys need to do things a little differently?
Well, again, look, I think, again, there are good and bad lawyers. There are lawyers who are just in it to get paid, and they take a bunch of cases, and as soon as they get the case, they put it aside, and they go on to look for the next one. They're not paying attention. I worked for one of the best criminal defense lawyers in this city, Ivan Fisher, for years. And I was astounded at how sometimes these other lawyers would come in on a big case. They hadn't read the indictment. They hadn't read any of the discovery material. They didn't know half the stuff that was going on, and they didn't care because they were getting paid huge amounts of money. And it was just, okay, well, whatever. We're gonna do our best. We're going to get up and stand in court and see what happens. But that's a small percentage. That's a few. There's some great criminal defense lawyers out there. But again, I mean, you can't generalize when it comes to criminals, when it comes to corrections officers, when it comes to lawyers. There's good and bad in the whole spectrum.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to figure out, Aaron, is what systemic reforms can we make so that the lawyers, the judges, the COs, the criminals, the bad ones, don't end up having a disproportionately negative impact on all of society?
Well, I mean, even with the attorneys, I mean, the caseloads are ridiculous. Like in the federal system, they talk about the conviction rate is 95%, and it's because everybody pleads out. And it's just this tremendous caseloads that are being put on, legal aid lawyers, public defenders, and they can't give the attention to each case that is needed. So you have to start with the legislation. You have to stop making so many things crimes. If there's you have to deal with crimes that have victims. If they no victim, no crime. It's that simple. And when I say no victim, I'm not talking about some amorphous society is a victim of a crime. I'm talking about actual victims of crime. And that's just the beginning. You have to have accountability across the board, not just for COs. You have to have accountability for judges, for prosecutors. There needs to be some way to hold them accountable. And if you have something like judicial immunity, where judges can do whatever they want to do, and they can never be sued, no matter how far afoul of the law they go, that's a problem.
Mathew Mari, we've had you here an hour. That means we probably owe you about $450 as a criminal defense attorney.
Well, tell us. A good lawyer gets $800 because I like it, $600 an hour. In the private bar, let me put it to you this way. I hate to say it. For a criminal defendant, if you're shopping for a private lawyer, it's caveat emptor. You've got to ask other people, who is this guy? What has he done before? And it's not about winning or losing, because any good criminal lawyer will tell you, we lose 98% of the time. It's very rare to walk out of the courthouse with your client. Most of it is about plea bargaining. Failure to plea bargain is sometimes the most corrupt thing that a lawyer could do. When you tell your heavy pocket client, oh, we're going to trial, we're going to beat this thing, and he says, oh yeah, great, that's why I came to you. Yeah, well, let's go. And the guy gets 100 years or 50 years. Look, it's tough. Yeah. It's tough. But I was telling someone yesterday about legal aid lawyers and public defenders. I said, 1/3 of them are young lawyers who are learning their craft, and there's something to that. To have a lawyer like that is good. 1/3 of them are good lawyers who just don't know how to get a case. They're just not out there, and they don't want to be. They'd rather just get paid by someone. And maybe 1/3 of them are just not good. But the system does monitor the lawyers. Who they don't monitor are the prosecutors, who bring cases viciously, knowing that they're doing wrong, putting up false witnesses. The public don't believe that. Yeah, Frank, you and I know about many cases, I'm sure that Mr. Stratton knows too, from being in jail, where, the prosecutors are just without any kind of supervision at all.
We need a discovery process.
Elias, Shakespeare never said kill all the correction officers. He did write kill all the lawyers.
No, he didn't say that. He said kill all the lawyers, and then tyranny will prevail.
Tell me what. Let's see, I'm out Shakespeare'd. Tell me, Elias.
I know about Shakespeare.
Finally, you've talked about the case of Khalif Browder, and you've said that, look, it wasn't the COs that prosecuted him without having a backpack that he supposedly stole. It wasn't the COs that arrested him without having the backpack that he supposedly stole. It wasn't the COs that sent him to Rikers Island and gave him bail, but it's the COs that get the blame. Tell me, what role are the lawyers, prosecutors, defense attorneys playing at the state level, the city level, and federally, if you care to comment, and how can that change?
Well, I think, in talking about his case, I think that when we have them in our custody, we don't decide whether they're going to go to court. We don't decide whether their judge is off that day or whether the DA is decided. No, we don't make any of those decisions. We just hold them until it's time for them to go to court. I think that in order to really change things, or in order to really have change to criminal justice or have criminal justice reform, you have to start from the beginning. You have to start from the beginning. And that's not what they're doing. And like you said, the judges, the lawyers, the prosecutors, everybody's allowed, this free ride. And it's only the correction officer or only the police officer. We're the villain all the time. And that's something that, as a president of the union, I'm never going to stop fighting. I'll actually be fighting that, and the next president will be fighting that, because, the perception of correction officers is what it is. But at the end of the day, we do a damn good job we take custody of more than 100,000 New Yorkers a year, and most of them go home just the way they came, and that's because of the job that we do. And those times or those periods when things go wrong, and we have to address it.
We'll let Matt,
Frank,
Aaron, and Richard respond, and then we'll wrap it up.
Just to follow up on something that we talked about in the last segment about bail, people being in jail for so long, waiting to go to trial. This is the problem. Not so much bail. People should not be lingering in jail for more than 6 months, no matter what the charge is.
And by the way,
we've got to enforce the speedy trial rules, no matter what.
100%.
Or let the people out.
100%.
They have to get out.
I want to get a question in, and then I'll let these gentlemen have the last word. If people are interested in the bail issue, by the way, I do want to mention that tonight at 7:30 on HBO, on Vice, they're doing a whole segment on this RFK bailout, what the implications of it are, how it came to be, and how it's working out. So if you're interested in delving a little more and learning a little bit more about it, you could probably check that out. You had one quick comment, and then I'll let Aaron and Richard.
Curiosity. Aaron said that he was put into jail because he hijacked an airplane. So was this something that was just conjured up in his head, or did this really happen, and how would he know how to do such a thing?
Well, he definitely hijacked an airplane.
The group that I was, acting against was a figment of my imagination. It was delusions. I was suffering from delusions. So once I recovered my sanity, I was, recommended for release in 2005, and that's when I had to fight for the next decade for the government to actually obey the law and release me. I had to become my own attorney to do so.
You want a last word on this, and then we'll bring Richard in, and then we gotta wrap up.
And then I just wanted to touch on his point about not only focusing on corrections officers. I focus on judges, prosecutors, politicians, because politicians are the ones that I think almost never are held accountable when we're talking about the broken criminal justice system, and they really are the first ones responsible for it. So I'm one of the people that will, and I know there's many others who will focus on all levels of the problem in this broken criminal justice system.
And by the way, Elias is going to be in that segment on HBO on Vice tonight at 7:30. So if you can't get enough Elias, you could catch him tonight at 7:30. Richard, we'll give you the last word.
Well, I just want to go back to something that I think it was Elias who said, a crime is a crime no matter where it's committed. Not true. You get busted with drugs and you come from an affluent neighborhood up somewhere, and your father and your mother have got a lot of money, you're not going to jail.
It's still a crime.
It's still
Whether
a crime.
Whether you go to jail or not is a different issue.
It's
but
not
it's still
treated
a
as a
crime.
crime. It's not, because
Okay.
there's
Well, let's be clear.
a lot
It's a
of
crime.
inequality in the criminal justice system, and the people who get the worst of it are the people who come from poor neighborhoods who don't have access to good education.
All right, let's give it up for everybody here today. I learned a lot. Hope you did too. If you didn't catch any portion of this, if you're watching on Facebook, you can listen as we post the podcast at am970theanswer.com, or you can go to our Facebook page at am970 The Answer and watch the video of any of our three panels today. Thank you, everybody, today. Thank you. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, Frank.
All right. I hope you found that as interesting as I did. This is the Morano Whenever Podcast. You can always hear whatever it is that we're doing by going to am970theanswer.com. In addition to hearing this podcast, you can hear podcasts of the Morano in the Morning program and a lot of the other great shows that we have here on AM 970 The Answer. You want to get in touch with me, you can email me at morano@nycradio.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Frank Morano. That's Frank, Morano. And you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MoranoFan. You may not believe this, but coming up in the next edition of the Morano Whenever Podcast, a legendary New York talk radio icon comes out of retirement to do one last interview. If you think you know who it is, you might be right. This is Morano Whenever. I'll see you on the radio.